I have been asked multiple times over the past week how I've managed to win nearly every war I seem to get myself into, including ones where I'm fighting coalitions of up to 100 countries with nearly 5-to-1 odds against me. Well, my friends, combat in Europa Universalis 5 isn't particularly complicated, but there are a bevy of stratagems that work exceptionally well against the AI. That means that today I'm going to allow you to pick my brain for every last tidbit of knowledge that I have regarding Europa Universalis 5's combat, and hopefully you can glean enough to put your country in the winner's position through every single war that you happen to get into. But before we begin, I'd like to ask you to like and subscribe, as my channel has languished heavily this past week due to YouTube's strange experiments regarding auto-dubbing. It really helped me out. I'd also like to thank my newest Patreon and YouTube members, Nick2Open and Juan. You guys are truly kings. I appreciate each and every one of you. Now, let's get into the video. If you have ever watched my channel, you probably know me as somebody who is extremely reckless when it comes to jumping into highly tense combat situations. It is something that has backfired more often than I'd like to admit, but it seems that this is a side of me that has been punished so ruthlessly by Europa Universalis 5's AI that I don't even do it anymore. The reasoning why is because information matters. Nearly unlimited vision isn't something that is gifted to you anymore. Enemy troops are often misrepresented or even outright lies when you look at the actual overlays in the game. The tactics mode is exceptional when fighting, but the zone of control issues can really mess with your plans. That is why before every single war you should know exactly what you're getting into. You should know exactly where every single one of your enemies are going to be, whether or not they have a sizable enough army to worry about immediately, whether or not they're within reach, whether or not you'll have to push through serious vision and attacker penalty regions that could result in your army ending up like Hannibal's crossing the Alps. You don't want that, trust me. My suggestion is that you should be looking for weak points. Weak points such as enemy allies who join the war who do not have forts and can be removed relatively easily. In fact, you should be looking for every single province out there that does not have a fort. Aim for those first to ramp up your war score in difficult wars that you want a white piece out of. If it is an enemy ally and you are not in a special war like a coalition war, you can even peace out with the newly conquered enemy ally for money, vassalization, or conquest. Another thing that is important to look for are areas in the enemy's land with extremely high combat penalties for attackers and bad vision. Chances are this is where the enemy army's doom stack is going to try to muster. You can actually plan out to harangue and harass enemy units as they try to move towards these locations, giving you a very big advantage in numbers over time. One major mistake I've noticed new players making is assuming that recently raised levies are properly balanced. This is especially bad for smaller tribe nations with relatively few levies. Oftentimes you'll find yourself having 500 troops in the middle and maybe 4 troops on the wings. This is a massive problem, especially if your 500 troops are made up of 100-man stacks. Break those stacks up. You'll be far better off with 104, 300, and 104 troops respectively than having simply 500 troops in the middle. The reasoning why is simple. If you happen to have exposed fronts, the other fronts will take exponentially more damage, resulting in you losing far more troops than you would have otherwise. Simply put, you should make darn sure you're clicking that balance unit button every single time you raise your levies. Do not assume that the AI did it correctly, because I can guarantee that if you do, you will regret it later on. It is just as important as putting a general into your army. Another factor that you should probably be paying attention to is the position of your more valuable troops. Do not put your noble cavalry in the front lines. Do not put your armored horsemen in the front lines. Always position your levies in the front so that they are the ones who end up taking the most damage. They are much easier to replace than your much more valuable and even expensive troops are. So let the levies be the cannon fodder. Don't worry, your backlines will get many chances to do a great deal of damage without having to be in the front line. Finally, if you happen to notice that the enemy has an extremely weak front in one of their armies, do not be afraid to load up your best damaging units onto that front. Say you have 50 noble cavalry and you notice that the enemy has a line with only 10 troops. Put a levy on the same front as their troops to serve as a damage sponge, and then load up the back lines with all the cavalry you can. Then watch the fireworks as you happen to decimate their line immediately and start doing massive damage on the exposed fronts with those horsemen. Are you facing off against superior numbers and they've already managed to unify their doom stack? Do you live in a mountainous region and you happen to have a fort along the front lines that just so happens to have a +3 attacker penalty? Do not be foolish and sit on that fort. It will prevent them from ever trying to take it. Instead, take up a defensive position on another +3 attacker penalty tile that is not the fort. That way your enemy will actually be alert to the possibility of removing that obstacle by sieging it. That is when you should strike out at them. Assuming you have relatively similar troop types and relatively similar numbers, you will be pleasantly surprised at the level of damage that you will be able to do to them in an instance like this. Why? Because the army that is sieging down a location is the army that is seen as the attacker, even if they are technically defending. This is a great way to put them at a massive disadvantage without having to rely on luring the AI to some remote location. Another simple tactic that you should be focusing on in every single one of your wars is seek and destroy. Become the Jaeger and get out there and hunt down each and every single small army that has not had a chance to unify with the Doom Stack yet. If you want to guarantee that the enemy will not be able to doom stack and instead they'll remain splintered and fractured, well, try to make a relatively strong ally that just so happens to closely border your intended war targets. They will become the targets for sieging, and the enemy AI will actually splinter off a relatively small army on every one of those locations, giving you perfect targets for hunting. With enough targets and enough enemy AI sieging mindlessly, you will be able to whittle down armies that are infinitely larger than yours, assuming that you can avoid their doom stack as you hunt. You cannot kill what you cannot see. Perhaps that's one of the best reasons to actually have allies in the first place. Not only do they give you intel on the location of other enemy parties without putting your own troops at risk, but they lure enemies to their locations for sieging, giving you a perfect line of sight for targets to overtake. However, you will not be afforded this luxury throughout the entire war. I once more have to remind people that vision in Europa Universalis 5 is extremely limited in comparison to Europa Universalis 4. With so many small locations out there, it is actually very easy to find yourself covered by the fog of war, especially in regions with plenty of forests, mountains, and hills. That is why it is often a good idea to recognize areas where the AI's pathing is likely to take when moving your armies around. Aim to station your own doom stack on those low visibility, high defensive areas until you're ready to make your own move towards taking a fort or attacking an enemy army. This way you can keep the enemy AI at bay, preventing them from moving through, or if they do happen to move through, you'll not only see it coming, but be gifted with a defensive battle with a defensive advantage. Of course, if you're particularly cheesy like I am, you could always just split off a tiny stack of levies and send them in as scouts. If they get wiped out, no big deal. Better them than your main army, right? Pathfinding is a major nuisance in Europa Universalis 5, to the point where it's actually untenable in large-scale wars. Fort zone of controls can really muck things up, and you'll likely run into situations where you could have wiped out an enemy army, but your army was delayed just long enough by an unwanted detour, giving the enemy army a chance to escape. Forts, like in every Europa Universalis game since EU3's Napoleon's Ambition update, exert a zone of control that prevents you from simply moving from one location to the next should you intercede with that zone of control. But with how jagged, crooked, and off-kilter every single location happens to be, using a simple mindset of a 9-square grid will not always work because it can be difficult to recognize where each grid actually is. This is why I often suggest to people to fight the majority of the wars in their own land, or preferably in your allies' land. The AI seems to struggle with the concept of futility, and they come off as far too hyper-aggressive for their own good. So even if they suffer from a severe lack of troops, they will still often try to send those troops in to take strategic locations within your country or your allies' country. That is what gives you opportunities to move in and kill them repeatedly until they're weak enough to completely overtake. Honestly, the only times you should ever really allow yourself to put up with the annoying pathfinding and zone of control is if you're actively hunting down the enemy force that is much smaller than you, or if you're intending on dropping sieges after already cleaning up a sizable proportion of the enemy army. Taking the province capital in a siege results in you getting every single location within the province. That leads to the question as to the viability of carpet sieging in Europa Universalis 5. When you couple the poor visibility with the difficulty of timing your troops' movements, the jagged structure and difficulty of measuring the distances in each location, you will eventually find yourself in a point where the enemy army could saunter into your carpet siege and wipe out one of the small armies before you could even react to it. At the same time, re-raising levies is far easier to do now than ever, and against even moderately sized countries you probably will not be able to prevent them from bringing out their admittedly very weakened armies. So I have to ask the question, is carpet sieging still a useful tactic in Europa Universalis 5? I'm going to go out on a limb here and say for medium to large countries the answer is a definitive no, unless you happen to have an extremely sizable advantage in numbers and can afford to split up smaller armies that will still outnumber the enemy. Oftentimes, it's simply better to let the tiny enemy armies wander off to siege some random location on the other side of the map than it is to try to prevent them from raising entirely. At the same time, you won't really be able to take a province any faster anyways. The fort and capital of the province are the truly important pieces that you should be aiming for, not the adjacent locations that have marginal value at best. That means that I have personally stopped carpet sieging entirely, and I instead adopted a simple tactic of leaving a strong siege force to handle the fort, while my main force goes off and acts as a hunter, aiming to keep the enemy troops weak, disjointed, and unable to break the siege entirely. The weaker the enemy gets, the more siege forces you can afford to splinter off. Again, I have to tell people not to siege down multiple locations with tiny siege forces. Those are the primary targets for the enemy AI to encircle around on, and the enemy AI is exceptionally good at staying outside of your vision when they do happen to move around. You will be caught off guard more often than not, so why give them a chance to reduce your forces at all? I would actually prefer not to siege with a force that is smaller than the enemy's main doom stack for this reason. If the doom stack is too big, well, then I guess you got some work to do breaking them down, don't you? This is a part of the game that is so important that it actually boggles my mind that more people don't do it actively. Every single war, your very first goal should not be to aim for the main war target, but rather aim for the weakest, most simple to overtake ally as possible. I don't care if they don't bring in a huge amount of money, land, or prestige. Hit them first. I do have to remind you that even countries with 50 tribal levies can still offer up generals with huge stats. They might not end up being the leader of every battle every single time, but there have been weird instances where that terrifying 99 military skill general with plus 10% infantry power ends up being the leader of a 10,000 man doom stack, even if they only had 10 troops. It is better to remove those possibilities entirely by removing those allies entirely. Don't forget, every single extra country out there ends up being an extra target that will draw away the attention of your AI allies, and if you haven't noticed it yet, your allies have a particularly bad AI that causes them to abandon sieges they've been on for months just because a slightly better opportunity opened up a mile away. So take away those slightly better opportunities and get your stupid AIs to do their darn job. Finally, not every enemy ally is going to be poor or worthless. Some of them will actually have very large war chests, and after being defeated soundly, they can help you in a war by funding your next mercenary troop. War reparations will also allow you to maintain yourself in a heated war as well. Heck, you can even vassalize them or take land to improve your own country further. And it might even give your enemy a target to hit that won't really hurt you that badly. I know, I've already done a video on this, but I cannot help but stress how important this little issue is. Even if your allies happen to have a smaller amount of troops than you, they can still steal leadership of a siege. You will have to be very vigilant about watching every siege when it hits 0% or higher, simply because of this fact. Thankfully, you can assume leadership of a siege should you happen to have more troops than them by clicking this handy dandy little button, but you are not warned when siege leadership is stolen from you, so if you are not paying close attention, you cannot hit that button now, can you? I really do hope they fix this little issue in the future, but I hope you don't find yourself in a position where you lose a pivotal location because your AI ally decided to send 10 troops into your siege. It has happened to me before, and it is one of the most frustrating things that can happen in the game, so please, please, please be very, very careful. I would like to thank everybody who has watched this far into the video. I actually did do my very best to keep it as concise and information-packed as possible. Heck, I even discarded an older version of this very same type of video because of how disjointed and rambly it was. So please, I do hope you enjoy what I've wrought for you. Maybe even tell your friends about it. Wink wink, nudge nudge. I typically do long-form streams, guides, and playthroughs of both Victoria 3 and Europa Universalis 5, but we will be adding Hearts of Iron 4 to the mix soon, so if those Paradox games are right up your alley, make sure to see my other videos like this one here talking about which trade policies are the best ones to pick in Victoria 3. Anyhow, I hope this guide helped you get better at Europa Universalis 5, and I hope you can go out there and kick some real arse now. Remember to give your loved ones an extra hug tonight because they might not be here tomorrow. Believe me, I know. Beyond that, thank you again for watching, and hail Hydra Cat.